Today, we thought we would expand a little bit on this going back to work topic that we had discussed in a prior episode, which we can link, and specifically hone in on childcare or options around having children and working at the same time, which is probably the situation you're in. And it's funny because today your kid's actually home.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, as we all know, having a kid and being a parent when you're working throws different things into the mix. And one thing I have heard a lot of people say that they're going to try, and we can go into this of how it works, how it doesn't. But I know a lot of families, especially now that there's more of a hybrid and work from home environment. Not sure if that's going to be fluctuating at all in the upcoming years, but depending on your work situation, usually there's some option to be at home in different industries. And people will say, hey, I'm just going to try to work from home and work around the baby because it's still a baby. Usually, when you're transitioning back to work, that's between anywhere from a couple of months to 6 months on the longer end for people, usually in the US. And the baby's not mobile, especially if it's just a couple months, still napping quite a bit. So it can theoretically feel very easy to be like, I'm going to juggle taking care of my baby and just working when they're down, or I'm going to baby wear and then work while I baby wear. And I feel like that's always shorter lived than people expect it will be.
Yes. Yes. And I can tell you, I think one of the biggest reasons why is because although we see babies sleep for 2 or 3 hours, that is really 2 or 3 hours of them sleeping, and that's not necessarily the time that you get to do what you want. And I think you can relate to this, Amanda, too, just working from home a lot and having a lot of different projects, that there's something to be said about transitioning from working and concentration to going over to taking care of baby and then back again, right? And then also this idea of needing a break in between to reground. So I think even if baby slept for 2 hours, you might at the most be getting an hour, if that, of solid work in those little spurts.
I think there's also just the unpredictability of babies in general. There's two things. One is the first year and 2 years, really, there's so many changes happening so fast. So as soon as you get into one rhythm or you tackle one obstacle, then you're just going to outgrow it and get to the next one. It's like these different levels that you're hitting. That can be really frustrating, especially when you add in pressure or stress of work. The second thing ties into it, just the unpredictability of a baby. Maybe they generally sleep around this time, but what if it's a day that they don't go down for that first nap? Or what if it's a day they go down an hour later? There's so many variables. And I don't think there's one person I know who feels like this multitask juggling both at the same time is in any way helpful for themselves or for the work they do or even for the baby. And they end up feeling more exhausted and more overwhelmed than if they just time chunked things and got to prioritize being with their baby when they were with their baby and prioritize doing their work when they're doing their work. And the quality of those times is just so much greater when you have that. It's just really hard to do that when your kid's around, even when they're 8 years old and homesick for the day. There's this energy of your child being there. And it's obviously a lot harder when they're younger, but it's just different when you have your own space and you're able to focus and do your things, or especially if you're meeting with people online. Yes, you can have your child there and it's just distracting. There's some underlying sense of not being able to show up for that person in the meeting. You're tearing your attention in all these different directions. And then that just creates a lot more unease in everybody.
And I can contest to the meeting ones because even at 8, my son be in a meeting like, do not bother me for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, even if we're recording a podcast. I hear the door open in the background, like you said, and then he's like tugging on my leg or poking at it as if I didn't hear him come in. And so it is very distracting. So now when I'm in the meeting or even on the podcast, I'm not like, as you mentioned, fully present. That can be very distracting. And even working from home, even if they're sick or whatever, it's hard because 20, 30 minutes in, you're really in a good flow. And then all of a sudden, hey, I need water
Yeah.
or whatever the
Or the
case
baby
is,
wakes
right?
up.
Baby
Yeah.
wakes up and needs to be fed, or it's definitely a challenge. I think some of the successful ones I've seen have been the ones that have somebody come in for a period of time, like around lunch, and they literally go in their room and they lock the door. And the idea behind that is that when they're younger, they can still breastfeed, so baby can be brought to them, but it's very like specific for that. And the other one I've worked through too is where the parent tag teams or a friend tag teams with them so that they take the kids for a couple hours that they can work and have that chunk of time, as you said, and then they switch, right? And it might not be that same day, but every other day or something like that. So those are the
Yeah.
ones I've seen successfully work at home.
A good thing we could do now is give both of our little stories of what worked for us or what didn't work for us. And then we can end with a wide variety of options that I think you can get very creative with how to create that space and in a way that's we don't always have to just be the hire the full-time nanny or put your child in daycare. Like, those don't have to be the only options. So we can explore some of our creative suggestions at the end because I'm sure we've both given people creative suggestions. But why don't we start with your story? Because for quite a while, for the first 5 years of your
Hmm.
child's life, you juggled working as an acupuncturist in home
Hmm.
office and then having your child at home the whole time, doing your midwifery stuff at the time,
Right.
a million and two other things while your child was home fully
Yes.
with you.
Yes. Yes.
Those days feel so long ago,
Long
but
ago.
there's
Yes.
probably a lot of wisdom that you gain
Yeah.
from all that. So
Think the first thing with that is timing and planning and getting creative. My particular case, as you said, I had a home office type thing. It wasn't in home, but it was regulated for that. When I had a client, my then partner would take my son and watch him. And as far as studying and spending time with him, like you said, I really try to do what I was doing, right? So when I was at work, I did work. And then when I was at home with him, I tried to be at home with him. I also utilized friends sometimes so that I could get some time alone. I would watch her kids for a little bit and then they would watch mine for a little bit. And the other thing, as far as studying and stuff for midwifery, I'd put my son to bed, I'd lay with him, might even take a nap for an hour max, and then wake up and do a couple hours of studying. And that was the process that we made it happen. And when he got a little bit older, I found an after school program that didn't require him to be enrolled in a school. So then I got a few hours every Monday through Friday to send him so he could go play for a few hours basically, and then I got to work.
I'm curious with that because did you just have days or time slots during the week that were already chunked out and your then partner, the dad knew, okay, they would be with the child during those times. And so that way you knew you could book your clients during that time? Or did you do the opposite of like when you booked the clients, then would ask? Or like, how did that work?
Yeah, we had a shared calendar so we could see because we shared the office space as well. So we could see, and then we just knew that someone would be home during typical business hours. And anything outside of it, like a weekend thing, we would book it and then follow up and make sure. That's how we did it, just through a calendar.
Yeah, and you said also you had your parents 1 day a week at the time, which
Yep,
was
that's
nice,
right.
like in the cycle of helping
Yep.
out.
So that way I could maybe work on clients for a couple hours or just straight go to a coffee shop and sit and study and do some work and stuff like that. That was great. I think she spent about a half day, a little bit more than a half day, till 2 or 3. Yeah. And
Cool. Yeah.
yours?
My situation was similar, but slightly different. I think that's a valuable thing is to look at what your partner's situation is, depending on where you live. And I do know that different states have different things around paternity leave. I do like that it is being noticed more. And in some states, there is quite a bit of paternity leave that fathers are granted if they have been with their employer for a certain amount of time. Planning that with your partner is a really great way to ease into that separation because you feel more comfortable or having family. If you do have family, step in at that beginning part is great. So we did that. We didn't have family, but we did the little bit of titration. My partner titrated going back. So he took his time and then started going back 2 days a week, then 3 days a week, and also worked in, this was pre-COVID, but he worked in a deal with his boss of doing some hybrid working even back then. We discussed this in our podcast about returning to work, about asking the employer if you are with an employer or your partner's with an employer. That's a very valuable thing to do. Don't discount that other people would probably be willing to compromise on some front to help you, because that definitely helped having him there for some of the time. And even when COVID did happen and all the daycares closed and the schools closed and everything, that's all we did because my child was about a year old at the time. We chunked for 4 hours. You get it here for 4 hours. I'll be working here. And we just took turns taking care of
Hmm.
her, which sounds similar to your
Yeah.
situation. But generally, what we did is we were very fortunate to have a neighbor, like literally right next door, reach out to us and say that they were interested in babysitting or for childcare if we ever needed it. We compromised a little bit on the pricing to start because I work for myself. I didn't get maternity leave. And definitely worked up to giving her what she wanted within a few months. What we did was we just looked at our budget. We said, okay, this is what we want to pay. And then I planned that between naps. So I knew, and my child was not a consistent napper. It was not at the same times, but I knew generally in the morning, sometime in these 3 hours, she'll sleep 30 minutes to an hour and a half, like something like that. Our neighbor, Myra, who was amazing, starting at a month and a half or 2 months, she would come over for 2 or 3 hours, and it would be between the major windows when Penelope would sleep the most. And that was the only time I took meetings and calls. I learned really quickly not to schedule calls and meetings during any of the time when she would be napping. And I would then try to take the time for napping to then do some work. I had small windows for meetings. And then I did try to work on those nap times for getting some other small things done, but I tried to keep those light and not really deep work.
Mm.
Going through your emails,
Right.
updating my to-do list,
Right.
things like
Yeah.
that. And then sometimes at night after she would go to bed, I would do deep work that didn't include needing to be talking to people on a meeting. So that was
Right.
how I made it work for me. And it was still stressful, but I think coming into, okay, this is the rhythm, which we'll link
Hmm.
to our rhythms and routines, rhythms versus routines episode. Finding your rhythm was really important. And then when I needed more time for deep work, I would just simply ask Myra, can you be with her longer today? And then I would just fluctuate paying her more if I needed more time for that work. And then I did start a daycare at 8 months, and I only started 3 days a week. That worked out great for us. And so between the option of having the childcare next door and the daycare, that gave me enough time. And I actually really liked that balance. Everybody's different. Again, we'll link back to our transitioning back to work episode. I had an option. I remember at one point I was going through an interview process and got really close to taking a full-time job. Again, this was pre-COVID. And I'm really glad I didn't, because I think having that balance, like I wanted to be working and I loved my time with my kid. And I think this comes back to because I had my 2 or 3 days of I can focus for 5 hours on these 2 or 3 days and like really get my stuff done. Then the times that I was with her, basically Friday through Monday, I really felt like I could give her my all. I didn't really have to stress about doing too much. There wasn't too much to worry about because I know I had that time set aside and I could really be with her. That felt really nourishing. I don't feel like I missed out on any of her childhood or I wasn't there for her in any way. And I think that me having my time to like mentally do what I wanted to do, like you
Hmm.
said, connect with adults and be an adult, actually for myself really benefited my time with her as well. So,
I think you hit on, and I actually remember at some point putting my son in nature school, very similar, just a couple days a week. And I think that's the thing that when you're a new parent, you forget that you can actually do part-time. It doesn't have to be every day of the week.
yeah,
And the part-time, like you said, is so nice because you do get that time with them, but also you just get that little bit of space from them. And although it's hard on that first day to send them away, you realize it's so nice to have that space again.
yeah,
And I think a really important thing that I realized and took a little while to get to is the idea, like you said, learning what chunks of your work have to really require deep work versus more shallow work. Because even if you're trying to write an important email or something, that is not the work to be doing in between the naps. That's more of your deep focus work. But yeah, just going through emails, this is all trash or junk, is more on updating your to-do list. It's easy to break it up, but important emails, not so much.
Yeah,
You
I just
emphasize
like
that.
seeing what's coming in and then yeah, at least knowing, okay, these are my top three priorities the next time I have a really good chunk of time.
Hmm.
So, because that can take a good hour sometimes of being, okay, what do I have here? What are my like top goals right now and things like that.
Yeah. And I just want to say too, just working with other families, they do very similar things as far as like working out childcare, where they'll have the dad or the partner take off, go back to work pretty quickly after baby's born, maybe even a week or a few days after. Mama stays home and then they flop, right? Or they, like you said, titrate out. It might not be a hard stop, but then mom starts going back to work a little bit and then dad starts coming in a little bit more or whatever. And I
Yeah.
find that to be a really smart way to utilize that paid time off. Another friend of mine, actually, she ended up getting Fridays off for the first year. That's actually really nice. She worked in a corporate setting. And if you can do that, financially and your work's okay with it, she'd still be available if they really needed her, but she really tried to take that time off. Get a 3-day weekend and how much work actually gets done on Friday.
Yeah. Yeah, coming back to that, it's just there's a lot more possibilities than people allow for in their minds, and just even asking. And again, maybe you're taking a little bit of a pay cut, but for a year or
Hmm.
two, is
Yeah.
it worth it for you? There's a lot of things that at least I'm realizing it's like I value a lot of different things more than money sometimes. Or it's like,
Hmm.
oh, we're working for all this money to buy us more time, but really, yeah. So it's good to look at those and explore those options.
Especially with babies, even if you took them somewhere, they're not going to remember, right? You're not going out as much because you have a new baby. And so it's really that financial difference usually isn't a lot in that first year. And they don't need much either. What else,
Another thing to look at is how much would you be paying for childcare on those
Right.
days over the course of a year? Is that equivalent to the financial difference? Oftentimes it is, or even it's more.
Right. 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 Very good point, actually.
Let's go really quickly through. We've mentioned a bunch of options here, but I think we can summarize and go through some of the options. So, if you have family, I think asking family if you trust them and love them and they're nearby, it's beautiful to have family nearby. If there is a possibility, and even community, I would say, if you have a neighbor, we mentioned this, I think, in our other episode, but sometimes there's like a retired older lady that lives next door that just really loves babies and would love to come spend a half a day with your baby every week. It's a win-win for both of them and maybe not even get paid.
Right.
Just really tuning into what community and family you have, I think is a really great first step to do.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then obviously talking with your partner. We mentioned
Hmm.
that, seeing if
Hmm.
there is flexibility or options of who's doing what when, and if you can time chunk that way.
Getting creative too and being available to situate or move around your schedule a little bit. So, like I said, at one point, I would go to bed with my son for a little bit, an hour or 2 hours, just depending on what was happening, and then waking up to do that focus work when he was sleeping. And I know
Mm,
that's a hard shift, but being open to different things. And again, it doesn't have to be every day, but even a couple
yeah.
days that could give you at least a part-time, right? If you did that for 3 or 4 hours each night for 3 or 4 days a week, that's 12 to 16 hours of focused work.
Yeah, if you're an entrepreneur, obviously you could do that. And if you're an employee, I think just being, again, approaching your employer with creative ideas of like, hey, can I in my workday at 3 o'clock every day, and then I will make that time up and do that work at nighttime, and everything will get done. I promise you it'll all get done, kind of thing. As
Right.
long as you ensure that things will get done, seeing if that's a possibility, especially if you're going into an office. If you can leave a little bit early and say, hey, can I work at home for a couple nights to make up those hours after my child's in bed?
Hmm.
I also love that you talked about the pod idea, which
Hmm.
came around during COVID, and I was so hopeful it would stick more. There's so many things that are fading that were actually really beautiful, like the hybrid work from home,
Hmm.
the pod
Yeah.
situation, and why did we not keep these going? That idea of finding another family or friend or parent
Hmm.
that one or two, I would say, potentially even more if the kids are older, where each of you just take a turn with all the kids. So if you have yourself plus two other parents, then you get 2 full days. If you take a day with the kids and then each parent's taking a day, you get 2 full days. And then maybe you all split paying for a nanny on a fourth day or something like that. Then you get 3 days and your childcare cost is minimal if you're looking to reduce the childcare cost. So I do think the pod situation is really great. Depending on where you live, I think it can be easier or harder to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the other thing too is to look for college students or the elementary school kids that are getting into junior high, right? But also utilizing them because they don't necessarily have the capacity, maybe you don't feel comfortable leaving, but even being able to step into the room for 2 or 3 hours, please don't bother me unless it's an emergency, and see how it goes. It might not work out, but it might, and then you could get a couple hours and be paying like way less than you would for a babysitter, something.
Younger kids, it's a hard stretch for most people these days to hire somebody that young, but college students, yes. And specifically, I think if you're more concerned, like nursing student or
Mhm.
people who are in these fields that obviously are just more aware of acute care if needed, because I think that's where people get a little bit concerned
Sure, sure.
sometimes. But there's tons of nursing students out there that would happily
Yeah.
be a babysit or whatever, have some side cash flowing in
Mhm.
while they're at school. The other hard thing though with the college students I've found families find is it's not as consistent. So
Yes,
you do
yes.
need to have more flexibility, maybe better for an entrepreneurial situation or something where you own your own business.
I did forget too, as we're talking about this and college students, is au pairs. I believe there's websites and stuff like
Yes.
that. And a lot of times, if you have an extra room, you pay them a small stipend and then they're working. You have to work out all the stuff and all the costs is a little bit different. But if you have a spare room, that's also a really great way. And I've heard good things, really good things, and I've heard not so great things. So I
Yeah.
don't know about that one, but just want to throw it out there as an option because the ones that I have heard that are good are they seem very sweet.
Then also just nanny sharing. That's a big one where I'm from. People will get on Nextdoor or whatever way you connect with community. Honestly, just asking or putting the word out, I think, in your neighborhood, seeing who else potentially is in the neighborhood that might want to share the costs of a nanny. The nanny would then take care of 2 to 3 kids at once. Usually, the younger they are, the less is better. And on that note, actually, even hiring back to cheaper babysitters, hiring a mom who has a child who wants their child with them but wants the extra cash. They tend to be a little bit less than babysitters because they know, hey, my kid's along for the ride here. I'm bringing my child, which I actually like half the time, especially if their child's older and then yours is younger. It's a really nice balance of energies.
Yeah.
I've had people have really good success with that when they're on more of a budget.
And with
And
that, I would say trust your instincts.
trust
Trust
your
your
instincts and
instincts.
do what
Yeah.
works for you because what's going to
Yeah.
work for you is going to be unique to your family and your situation, just like everything else around parenting. I think then just what else do we have as far as creative solutions? Obviously, looking at your schedule, figuring out if you can do half days or chunks of time. Anything else as far as creative childcare options?
Yes, I think the other one too is just to maybe not an idea, but just keep in mind that a lot of this stuff is temporary. Like you
Mhm.
said, your little one went back at 8 months, so hiring the neighborhood for a babysitter, maybe she was a little more than you wanted initially, but you got to remember that things can change and it's not going to be like set for necessarily a year. It might just be for a couple months to get you through this period until you change and come across like a pod or whatever the case is too. The tip is then to remain flexible and do what you need in the moment and know that you can change it. Nothing's like set in stone.
This is definitely going beyond returning back to work, but I did the same thing as you with the after school care program
Mhm.
when my kiddo was actually in that in-between stage of daycare and then being school age of enrolling her in the after school program thing because I thought it
Mhm.
was so brilliant and it gave me extra time in the afternoons because again, I didn't have childcare on Mondays or Wednesdays.
Yep.
I started putting her in that after school program on Mondays and Wednesdays. It gave a few hours, which was amazing.
Exactly. Cool.
Cool. Well, that is quite a bit of information, and we are very into the creativity around this because I do think this is something that people have really moved away from and therefore just aren't as aware of as that there is a lot of possibilities and a lot of options and a lot of ways to make this work. One thing I just hear over and over is how expensive childcare is. And not that it doesn't need to be, there's a reason it's expensive because we need to pay the people that are taking care of our children, and there's not a lot of priority in finding these solutions or coming up with more creative ways to do this. So if you have other ideas or thoughts or things you've done, please do share them with us because I do think this is such an important thing to bring to people and expand more as a topic. I just wish that our world didn't have this one path and one way of doing things. And I think it would add a lot more flavor and joy to everybody's life if we had a little bit more of these possibilities in our scope of imagination when we enter into these paths of life. That's my little ending rant right there. But please
Love
do
it.
share your thoughts and share your ideas and share what has worked and what hasn't worked for you as well.
Yep. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.